This has truly been a day that history will remember. The sights, the sounds, the legacy left behind. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Walter. Songs and speeches filled the air in Qunu on Sunday as the country, the continent, and the world said goodbye to a man who not only helped topple apartheid and chart a course for the future, but also served as an inspiration for millions around the world. I'm joined by Anand Naidoo from Johannesburg. And Anand, it's really been a remarkable day.
Yes, Mike, it was quite a day. It marked the culmination of 10 days of mourning. South Africa and the world said their final goodbye to Nelson Mandela. His funeral was held in the small village of Qunu in the Eastern Cape region of South Africa. Thousands of people heard moving tributes and eulogies from ANC members, from statesmen there at the funeral. Shortly afterwards, his coffin was put on a gun carriage. It wound its way up a hill to the graveside with a military escort, and shortly afterwards, he was buried. It's been a day of unforgettable images and memories here in South Africa. Rene has our report.
Nelson Mandela had always expressed the wish to be buried in his boyhood village of Qunu, a wish that has now been granted. Officially by the government of South Africa, traditionally by the elders of the royal household of the Aba Tembu nation, of which he was a chief, and with a profound sense of loss by the people of South Africa. Most of the people of Qunu could not attend Madiba's state funeral on the Mandela compound, but followed the proceedings at mourning viewing sites around the village. And tears flowed freely as their hero was taken to his final resting place. For them, Nelson Mandela was a beacon of hope, peace, and forgiveness. And they say there will never be another like him.
Thank you, Dadu Mandela. You know, I and hopefully the rest of the youth of this country, you know, promise to actually keep your life's work as well as your legacy, that spirit burning into eternity. And that's what we want to do because he means so much to us.
It's a day of happiness, not a day of sorrow. He's had 95 extraordinary years. He has taught the world the act of forgiveness, the act of embracing your enemies and befriending your enemies, and then working with your enemies and even loving your enemies. And I think that's a lesson for all of us worldwide.
In 1996, the late Nelson Mandela said death is inevitable when a man has done what he considers to be his duty to his people and his country. He can rest in peace. Rene, CCTV, Qunu, in South Africa's Eastern Cape province.
In the year after his release, Nelson Mandela sought the help of many organizations, governments, and individuals. One of the men who answered that call was Gary Bedell, a former Canadian diplomat and protocol chief. Bedell moved to Soweto and became an aide to Nelson Mandela. I spoke with him a short while ago, and he told me about Nelson Mandela's anguish over his marriage to Winnie Mandela and the painful breakup that followed.
Many people talk about how difficult it was for him to spend so long in prison, 27.5 years. But I actually think that that year and a half after he got out of prison, with all of the pressure from governments on the right, Margaret Thatcher, President Bush, father, there was tremendous pressure. People didn't really want him to become president. They thought of him as a communist. They didn't trust him. And then also too, there were problems in his marriage to Winnie. So the poor, and he had to literally drag his own party, the ANC, into the negotiations because they weren't sure if it was the right thing to do. So here was this poor man all by himself, literally dragging his organization into the talks, dealing with all of these governments who really did not want him to become president, and then having problems in his marriage with the woman he so deeply loved. It was a stressful and very, very difficult time for him, and I admire him greatly because I think that to have gotten out of prison and to want to be happy with your wife and then to have all of these problems, I think only Mandela could have held up under those very difficult times.
Well, we know him as the statesman. The world knows who Nelson Mandela is. But in your experience with him in your interactions with him, did he come across as a person who was lonely?
Well, you know, I think that certainly initially when he was with Mandela, he was over the moon happy because he was very, very much in love with her. And even though we now know from Nadine Gordimer, the author, that he knew of her infidelity when he got out of prison, I think he wanted to give her another chance. I think he understood that it was quite natural, 27.5 years without any company, and I think he was willing to forgive that. I think when she continued to have the affair after he got out of prison, that became untenable for him, and the marriage broke down. And when it was, I think one of the most difficult decisions he had to make was when he asked Winnie to leave the house. And he did go through some very lonely times up to the election and immediately afterwards, because even if you're Nelson Mandela and everybody in the world knows you, you go home and you sleep alone and you're alone. And that's, I think, a very difficult thing after somebody who was also alone so long when he was in prison.
Did he ever talk about or display any kind of emotions about his children?
I think that Mr. Mandela had a complex about his children. I think he felt he hadn't been a good father, that he had abandoned them to a certain degree by being away initially when he was in hiding and then when he was in prison. And of course they suffered terribly. There were times when the police came and took Winnie away in the middle of the night and just left the children. They were quite small. And thank goodness that some neighbors would come and take care of them and bring them some food. But he really did feel a bit of a complex about having an abandonment. And I think it's probably why in these later years, when the family has been involved in so many dubious business deals and that sort of thing, and they've been heavily criticized by the public here in South Africa, I think he was willing to give them a wide berth simply for that reason. He wants them to have the means to live a good life. And he's very serious about them having enough money to live at the level that they need to live, because he did have this complex for a long time.
In that initial year, 1990, when he was released from prison, was it very difficult for him to adapt to life as a free person, to adapt to life in a place like Soweto after being in prison for so long?
Yes, because there was constantly people around. Those first days, the house in Soweto, the door was always open. Anybody could come by, and all of his old friends, George Bisos, Tambo, Walter Sisulu, would just arrive. And the place was a constant beehive of activity. And I think perhaps it was difficult. I remember some of the mornings that I got to be with him when he was just in his pajamas having hot chocolate, which was his favorite. And I think he relished those quiet moments when he could just maybe chat with one person. I also think, as a humble man, he found all of the media attention and the sort of the adoration around him as Mandela was something that he found very difficult to handle. He understood his place in history as an important person in his time, but he was always very humble.